So welcome back to another episode of Ectopics. It gives me great pleasure to present and to talk to and to have a conversation with my friend Josh Marshal. Josh has got an amazing story to tell, and as this interview unfolds, we're going to hear a little bit about Josh's history, but more excitingly, his new venture or adventure in life with Inclusion Access. Guys, this is your opportunity to grab a pen right now and write down Inclusion Access. Maybe you can Google it while you're listening to the podcast. But Josh Marshal, thank you so much for joining me in our Ectopics episode.
Thanks for having me.
Josh, let's learn a little bit about your story. I first met you when I was working as a nurse educator in Queensland Health. You came into one of our courses that I was teaching, and then, to cut a long story short, you actually came onto our team for a short period of time and worked with us as a nurse educator. But your story goes back a lot further than that, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it went back probably 6 or 7 years prior to that.
So, Josh, we're going to come very, very quickly to a discussion about multiple sclerosis.
Okay.
And your personal journey with that, and that was, I guess, the spark that lit the fire that is now Inclusion Access, and we'll talk very much about Inclusion Access. But talk me through from your when you first started diagnosis, recognising your first symptoms of multiple sclerosis. First of all, can you tell us what it is? What is MS?
So multiple sclerosis, or MS, is it's a demyelination disease. So it's where your body actually finds that your myelin around your nerves have actually become problematic to your body. So your body attacks that myelin, breaks down the myelin. So let's say if I was to kick my toe from the actual pathway between my brain and my toe, it might take you one hit of a nerve to run up there. It might take 50 for me, because there's breakdown in that myelin sheath around the nerves following the way along that pathway. Think of it like an electrical wire. The white outside part of the electrical wire has all of a sudden broken, so the electrical impulse can actually escape that wire. That could electrocute you. It's a bit the same though with MS. It can actually create a lot of concerns with the issues.
Josh, what were your first symptoms?
Yeah, okay.
Because I mean, you and I go back a fair way, but you were at one point in time a runner, and you were right into muscle cars and one of these super fit type athletic types.
It was kind of the culture, I suppose. So I used to work in the ICU at the PA hospital, and it was kind of the culture to go to the gym and be fit, and you go for runs every day. I used to run 10Ks a day and work out for another hour of my time after that run.
Before you go any further, let's get a timeline. So you were how old then?
So I was 22.
22 then, and your age today?
Is 38.
38. And Josh, you're not shy for me to tell everybody, I'm looking at a man who's now in a wheelchair.
That's correct.
So from 22 to 38. So let's go back to that gym junkie Josh, working in ICU at the PA hospital in Brisbane. Yeah.
So I used to actually parking, as most people would know around Brisbane, is not the easiest beat. So I used to park down near the Buranda train station, which was about 3 kilometres from the PA, and I'd be happy to walk it. It was easy parking, it was free, and I'd like the walk. One day I was walking to work, and I remember getting to the hill in front of the PA and dragging my toes behind me like I was wearing swimming flippers, trying to walk up the hill. So what's going on? This is very bizarre. I was nearly tripping myself up. Anyway, I got into work and I was fine. But that continued to happen. From there, I went on a Kentucky tour back as a 22, 23-year-old or something, and I was climbing the Eiffel Tower, would you believe, and I was tripping up the stairs the whole way. And I thought, this is really bizarre.
You know there's a lift in the Eiffel Tower that you can take to the top.
Yeah, I do know this, but at the time I was happy to take the stairs. Then walking to the Arc de Triomphe, I was falling over everywhere due to the cobblestone the ground surfaces everywhere. I got back to the PA after my 6-week holiday, and I requested an MRI. Having an idea what it may have been, I nursed a lady with MS when I was actually training at a nursing home. I saw some of her symptoms and I thought, this looks pretty similar. So I went and had my MRI, and I actually had the report sent to myself.
Okay.
And I read my own diagnosis, which said most probably multiple sclerosis. And my heart fell into my big toe. And oh crap, what does this mean for my future? From that stage, that's when I decided to go rural and thought, I'm going to go bush. People in the PA know, or the people in the ICU know of this diagnosis, because I told people. And it became a bit of a stigma. People didn't quite understand disability, I suppose. It's funny that often nurses, sometimes they understand the medical model of disability. They don't understand the social model of disability, the attitudinal, the barriers that present due to disability. And we'll talk about this with inclusion and access, I'm sure, soon. But because of my, I suppose, the stereotypical approach people gave me due to this diagnosis, I went bush. I had to do a course at the Cunningham Centre at the time, and hence where I met you, Rob, so I was an ICU nurse at the stage. I was in the process of studying my Masters of Emergency Nursing, as I also used to work at the RBH in their emergency department from time to time. And I love that area. I love the chaos of emergency departments.
I hear you.
So I was studying that, and I'd finished that soon after meeting you, actually, that first time. From there, I went bush, and a lot of things happened out bush, but I was still stable. The only time that things showed up is after maybe 3 night duties.
Yeah.
Where
when you were
I
tired.
hadn't slept, I was tired, and I remember one night on night duty, I had 3 traumas come through that I had to manage, and I was very, very tired and all over the shop, and I had to call the Don in. The director of nursing was actually the person on call at this hospital, and I called her in, and she thought I was drunk. She said, "Have you been drinking tonight?" She started yelling at me, actually. "What have you been drinking? What have you been doing?"
It's because you were stumbling, Josh.
I was stumbling.
Yeah.
And I was very reluctant to tell her, because I knew what happened to the PA, that I have MS. But once I did tell her, actually, it pretty much turned much worse than that.
Yeah.
You're an operational risk.
Okay, so I just want to be very, very clear. We're not implicating an organisation or a particular person, but just that there was a culture at the time that if you're working alongside a nurse who is impaired physically, not mentally, but physically, that becomes too much of a risk to deal with.
Well, that's right. So it's not only a risk to the person you're working alongside of, and I get that. But operationally, what could happen? What happens if you fall over? What happens if you trip over a patient?
Yeah.
What happens if you need to be reactive because a patient goes into arrest?
Yep.
And are you going to be able to handle the situation or manage a patient deteriorating? And that's something that become very evident.
Yeah.
And which has led to where I am today.
So from a clinical working point of view, nothing wrong with your brain, Josh, and still isn't. Despite that you're very, very old at 38. But physically, your days as a nurse were becoming numbered.
Yeah, they were.
And hence why we reconnected sometime later when you looked at coming to work as a nurse educator. And
that's right. So I went from working the PA to working rurally to settling down. I met my wife actually up around Cairns, and that was great. Something MS gave me, because I went bush, and if I didn't go bush, I wouldn't have met my wife.
Oh, that's nice.
So I ended up coming back to a place closer to where we are now, and scoring a community health job in cardiac rehab. So a phase 1 and phase 2 education program.
Yep.
So for people that don't know what that is, phase 1 is inpatient education for patients that might have had a heart attack or heart failure. Phase 2 is more the rehab. So I was doing both of those roles, and that was not obviously in a situation in an emergency department, which I love, but I was still working with patients in a different capacity. I scored a job then in Toowoomba, and on the heart care team in Toowoomba, so I was doing the same thing. I was mainly doing phase 1. We did a bit of phase 2 in Toowoomba, but that actually was outsourced to a different hospital. But I was doing a lot of patient education. The role came up at the Cunningham Centre where we could work together, and I applied for that job thinking I'm used to, I've worked in rural for a few years and I've done masters around this area in emergency nursing.
Well, you had emergency skills and you certainly had rural sort of pedigree in behind you. You had a great scientific mind, and it was a no-brainer, getting into that position. It was great working with you in those days, but those days were difficult because of the amount of travel that we had to do to teach around the state.
Right.
It was a rural education provider, and getting in and out of cars and planes and all of that started to become more and more difficult with your mobility.
It was more carrying our sim man.
Yeah, carrying the gear.
Carrying
Advanced life support comes with a lot of toys, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then soon after that, the position came up to be actually recruited to do permanently, and unfortunately, I didn't receive that. The girl that did is great, and I'm glad she did. But so,
from your time then as an educator, and then working subsequently down in cardiac care, doing some rehab education, your mobility started to deteriorate. What did the organisation do to make life easier, for want of a better word? Yeah.
I used to think my little falls around the hospital, which they would happen.
So you were starting to have falls, yeah?
I mean, I had a fall in the Cunningham Centre. You may remember that. I actually fell through a wall.
I remember seeing the hole in the wall. I wasn't there that day, but yeah, I do remember seeing a hole in the wall.
So where I used to work to the hospital was across a road, and into Hospital Road, and there was actually, there's 3 roads. 3 lanes of road, and there was obviously a pedestrian crossing that I actually fell over one day, and just walking across the road without any assistance, I was fatigued. It was the end of my shift.
Yep.
And I fell over, and somebody saw me that worked at the hospital, and they ran out obviously to see if I was alright, which was great, but they went straight back to management. You fell over in the road, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So, from an organisational point of view, their advice was I start using a wheelchair.
Right.
And
how did you feel about that?
Well, at this stage, I'd actually started using a crutch sometimes, and I hadn't been at the time, which I should have been, but I was walking around with the crutch for stability. And if I had a crutch, I wouldn't have fallen over, but I thought I was okay, and I was just popping up something back up to the hospital very quickly. I won't take my crutch. And I fell over. I hadn't actually used a wheelchair at this stage.
Was it on your radar?
It was on my radar. And the reason it was on my radar is I once again fell over at home.
Right.
It was a 40-degree day in Toowoomba. And I'd worked a big shift and I was very tired. I had young kids. I had a 1-year-old at the stage that hadn't been sleeping. Hence why I probably fell over at work too. So
tired dad, long day at work.
Hot day. I fell over at home and I did a spiral fracture on my tibia. And obviously the orthopaedic surgeon had seen the x-rays and said, I'm not willing for you to risk moon booting it and falling over again because I won't be able to fix that damage again. So he put me in a wheelchair.
Right.
Little did he know that being in a wheelchair actually makes life much more difficult because you lose the proprioception.
Yep.
You lose the ability to balance when you're sitting down for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I knew it was on the radar, but I had got out of the wheelchair. I was on 2 crutches at this stage.
Yep.
So it was on the radar. But when I'd fallen over, crossing the road without crutches, I could read the writing on the wall. So when the management turned around and said, you must start using a wheelchair at work, I thought, oh great, this is quicker than what I'd like. I was only, 30 at the stage.
Yeah, 30, 31, 32.
Somewhere there.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be in a wheelchair.
No.
But I started using a wheelchair, and you know what? In hindsight, I look back at this and think, my world has opened up so much wider because I'm in a wheelchair. When you're dealing with a crutch or a mobility issue, life is very purpose-driven. You know where you're going, you get there, you do what you have to do. But that's it. You don't take the opportunity to go out to the cafe, or to go to the shops, or to go and watch, like my son's soccer game these days. If I was on a crutch, I wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
In a wheelchair, I can do anything.
Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit to that. So we're 32, and it became evident that you're now in a wheelchair. 32, 33. At work in a wheelchair. It was still a couple of years away before you were permanently in a wheelchair. You've been now permanently in a wheelchair for how long, Josh?
Probably permanently about 4 years.
For about 4 years. So we're looking at 34 years of age.
Yeah.
So into a wheelchair at 34 years of age, and that is now a permanent fixture. So everywhere you go now is with your wheelchair, in a wheelchair, and you know, I'm sitting here looking at you in your wheelchair. You don't use an electric chair.
No, I push myself around.
So still got enough mobility in your arms to be able to push yourself around.
Yeah.
And watching you stand and transfer just now out of the car, no real issues with the stand and transfer.
No, it's not about strength. I work out every day.
Yep.
It's not about muscle strength. It's about balance.
Yes.
It's cerebellum.
Yep.
If you look at an MRI of mine, although there are a few spinal lesions, the majority of my lesions are in my cerebellum.
Right. Okay.
Which obviously directly equates to balance.
Sure. So Josh, where I'm going with this, you're now in a wheelchair, and when you started to use a wheelchair at home, probably anteceded by your fracture, you're now going places out into community in a wheelchair, and you're viewing it from a completely different vantage point, aren't you? Shops and cafes suddenly became more challenging or less challenging, or
a bit of both.
Talk me through your observation, because obviously something in what you've seen or what you've experienced in the last 4 or 5 years has led to you deciding stuff needs to change.
So a lot of it's attitudinal issues, and that was actually back from the hospital days that was on my radar.
Yep.
Entering cafes or shops. So it's the little things that people actually take for granted. It's the little step, which I can do a little jump up, but a lot of people can't.
Yep.
An electric wheelchair could not jump up a step. It's obviously the staircase, but it's also the ground surfaces. It's counter heights. It's table heights for me to be able to sit under the table, or under table occlusion, so that centre pole with legs that come down and prevent the front of my chair getting under the table, which means I'm going to spill the coffee in my lap if I'm not careful. Yeah. It's those sort of things. So I went and studied to become an access consultant. So that's part of what I do with Inclusion Access. I'm an access consultant. So I work with developers and business owners and managers to work through accessibility challenges and how can we overcome. Is it a ramp we need? Is it rails in the toilet? Is it tables that don't have that occlusion underneath? What is it that we need? But it's gone much beyond that.
So you started making observations because of necessity. Life put those curveballs in the way, and you started to realise that, you know, it's difficult to sit at some tables at a cafe and get through, you know, over the lip of certain, you know, doorways and floor surfaces, as you were saying, and just space to be able to manoeuvre a wheelchair in and around places like shops and cafes and restaurants and I guess public transport and things like that. Yes. But what was the trigger for you to say, I want to make a difference here? Where did Inclusion Access come from?
Okay, so it started actually, it was funny. I was on a holiday, and just so people know, this cannot be done. It's not allowed to be done. I was on a holiday, and I rang to ask for an accessible room, and they told me the only accessible room they have one.
A wheelchair room for
a wheelchair
accessible room.
A rail in the shower and a level transition room.
Yep.
And they said, but the only room we have is our penthouse. So you have to pay twice as much to use it. So that's the illegal part. They can't do that. That's discrimination.
That is wrong. Yeah.
It is wrong. So I paid for my penthouse room with my family because I wanted to...
Like, it's right to pay more for a penthouse because you want a penthouse.
But not if it's...
But it's wrong to charge you more because the only room that has wheelchair access is a penthouse.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
So I went up there and we paid our fortune to stay there. You're in the penthouse. You're up.
Tell me, did you pinch the shampoos?
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to pinch the shampoos.
My son did that. Look, I wanted to go to the balcony. You're in the penthouse. You want to look at the ocean. We're at the ocean. And you're up there. You want to get out and have a look.
Yep.
That's what you do. There's a step down to get out from internally to outside. That was about a foot. There was a small step in the middle. Mm-hmm. If you're able-bodied, you could walk down that step.
Yep.
But you couldn't get a wheelchair down there.
Okay.
So I went down to
So
reception.
it was touted as a wheelchair room, or an accessible room, but it really wasn't that accessible.
No. Well, it was accepted if you want to go outside. I went down to the receptionist and said to the young girl, I said, do you guys have a ramp or something I could borrow? Thinking you might have a removable ramp, which often people have. And she said, no. I said, but you said this was accessible. She goes, it is. I said, but I can't get out on the balcony. And she said, why do you need to get on the balcony? Like, you're in a wheelchair, why should you go on the balcony?
Ouch.
So I was not happy about that. And I let her know I was not happy about that.
Rightio.
But then I thought to myself, and this is where Inclusion Access started, I thought I need to start doing a rating scale for hotels, for cafes, for restaurants.
Like a 5-star scale, like
Sort of. Saying how accessible a place is. There is no legislation or standard currently governing what you can call yourself to be accessible or not. So you could own any venue and have a little tiny ramp to get up into the building and you can call it fully accessible.
even
There's
though
no
it's not.
legislation saying it's not.
Right, so there's levels of accessibility, and as you experienced
Absolutely.
in this penthouse, it was touted as an
not the
accessible
case.
room, but not that accessible. Yeah.
So I started doing this, and then there was a local business owner that had spent $70,000 to put a lift in.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a step to actually get into the building. So I said to him, I went to do a bit of an assessment, as he asked me if I'd like to do it, thinking he'd done everything he had to do, putting a lift in. Thought, oh, this is great. I couldn't even get in there.
So he was proud of his efforts as a proprietor for the business, that he'd made it accessible.
And he didn't understand.
And he wanted you to come and have a look at it to see, just, to road test it, so to speak.
But it wasn't accessible.
Okay.
And I said that to him, look, this is not accessible because of this lip. And he said to me, if you publish this and I lose business because of this, I'm going to sue you.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's a word I don't like. So I rang my lawyers and asked them, said I need, actually, it started by saying I need insurance. I went to get insurance and nobody would insure me without a qualification. I rang my lawyers and said, how do I get around this? And they said, you need to get qualified in a place where you can access it.
So you're not just some random dude in a wheelchair who's star rating businesses and potentially they could lose business because of your
That's right.
poor review or their poor... Okay.
Hence why I went into my access consultancy. It was only a diploma, but I went into the access consultancy.
Okay, so there's a line of study that somebody can do.
Yep. Diploma of access consultancy.
Okay.
There's a few places, there's a few places in Australia that do it, none in Queensland.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through a Melbourne institution to become an access consultant. But then I learned...
And all of this is in the last 4 years?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, 3 years. But then I learned there's much more than access that's a barrier to somebody with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and I'm actually studying a PhD currently with Deakin University.
Right. Congratulations on that.
I don't know if it's a congratulable thing. It's very challenging. Let's just say PhDs aren't easy.
Permanent head damage. I'm pretty sure that's what it stands for.
Well, that's very good. But look, I went and did my a master's around disability and inclusion to learn. I thought I knew it as a nurse. What disability meant. I knew the medical model. But this was looking at the social side of disability. That's attitudinal stuff. That's more than physical access barriers. That's barriers due to the way people talk to you, or they relate to you, or they stereotype you. And can I just interject quickly with something I just want to say about that in nursing? I was a nurse for almost 20 years. I thought I understood what disability was. Thought, I've had patients in wheelchairs. I get what wheelchairs were. I get what they are. I knew nothing until I was in a wheelchair myself.
Yeah.
It's funny that you take it for granted. You expect that, I nurse people in wheelchairs. I understand why people use wheelchairs. That's the medical model of disability. We understand that.
I think there's so many people that will be listening to this podcast probably absolutely understanding, as nurses, pushing around people in wheelchairs.
You understand that side of things.
Yeah.
You don't understand
what it's like to be in a wheelchair. That's right.
That's exactly right. So I went to Deakin and learnt all about, I thought I understood all of the disabilities too, but I learnt about sensory issues, tactile ground surface indicators, those little yellow dots you often see before a set of stairs or a ramp.
I'll now notice them.
Yeah, you put your access goggles on everywhere, trust me.
Yeah.
But then I'd learnt about different intellectual and cognitive disability, for instance. And I learnt about some of the barriers or challenges from a level of easy read text to website screen reading capabilities to communication, requirements to many other learning-based requirements. And I thought people that run any business really need to know this. They need to understand when they have somebody coming in that cannot communicate the way they're used to communicating. What is this barrier? How do I deal with this barrier? And that's where inclusion access really was born. So back when I was doing the rating scale, I took the name Inclusion Access because it's got the website, www.inclusionaccess.com.au. Oh, great.
You better say that again in case people missed it. www.inclusionaccess, all one word, .com.au. So that's your webpage.
Okay, we have a name. And then I paid for a graphic designer out of my little bit of money I had to do a logo for us.
Yep.
Which
so this is completely non-for-profit?
Not for profit.
Right.
We're not a DGR charity. Now, a lot of people wouldn't understand that, but we're a charity, but it's not deductible on your tax.
Right.
But we're a charity, which means we're not.
So anybody who pays for your services to come and do an assessment of their facility or to do a talk about disability, that money goes into the organisation to be able to do things like travel to deliver those sorts of talks and
or what my vision is, and we're not there yet. It's only been a few years, as we know, and I've done quite a bit of work, mainly education. I've done a few access consultancy gigs, and they're starting to pick up, and that's where the money is.
So, Josh, you can be booked to come and talk to organisations of nurses, doctors.
I do a lot of work with allied health, actually.
Right.
More things navigating the IS.
Yes.
My aged care. What's the law say about premises? How should it be, built to be? So I do a lot of that stuff with developers. And
nums and dons that might be listening to this can contact you to provide some presentation for their staff.
Absolutely. And that's where a lot of my work actually goes. I'm doing some work currently with the big organisation. I don't know if I can.
Best not to mention the organisation's names. Yep.
But I'm doing a big lot of education for healthcare professionals. At the moment, I'm writing a lot of curriculum around that.
Lovely.
So that'll get some, hopefully, a little bit better understanding out there. The attitudinal stuff. Let's get rid of that barrier. But anyway, back onto what I was doing. So then I studied my Masters of Disability and Inclusion and thought, I want to go and actually make a big difference. I want this to be a legacy to me. So I found an area which would be very relevant federally, in our legislation, and thought we need to actually make some long-term changes.
So there's some holes in the legislation that need change.
Some holes.
Some holes. Okay.
It's pretty much just a big hole. So I'm doing a PhD currently.
It's good to see you still have a healthy contempt for the system.
God, it's brilliant. It's so much fun. No, but that's currently where we're at. So I'm out there most days. I'm actually working with NWS, educating a lot of their LAC, so their local area coordinators.
Yes.
They need education themselves on how they work with people with disability day in, day out. However, their understanding sometimes actually falls short. Doctors work with disabilities all day. Nurses work with people with disabilities all day. Their understanding of this social side of things falls short. Like, once I give you a wheelchair and set you free into the community, what's going to happen? Are you going to fall over and hurt yourself and potentially sue us? What is the situation? Let's work with that. Let's work with that level of education.
So I'm just sitting here in awe that, you know, somebody can, in every sense of the word, take a lemon and turn it into lemonade in just the short space of time. In 4 years, 5-6 years, you've gone from diagnosis and being mobile but with balance issues through to going into a wheelchair, doing a diploma, doing a master's, another master's, and starting a PhD, setting up an organisation to provide education to organisations that should have a handle on disability, and all in a not-for-profit format. I just think that's remarkable, Josh. Do you sometimes sit back and think to yourself, I'm way too busy, I should just sit in my wheelchair and play chess?
That's what my wife says. She says you're too busy. Stop. Just get off the emails for 1 second. Look, it's more giving myself something to do. It's giving myself relevance.
Yeah.
I mean, I could sit around the house.
I guess the universe took nursing away from you, didn't it? And
however, what I've learned from nursing, once a nurse, always a nurse.
yes.
Well, what I've learned from nursing cannot be beaten. I've got that many experiences and stories that align with what I do now. All I've done now is taken, nursing and now access and combine the two. I love education. I love teaching. I think I'm talented in teaching and I love doing that. And that's something that you helped me realise, Rob, back in the day at the Cunningham Centre.
Look, it's not about me. Josh, you are very good about teaching what you're passionate about, and I think that's true of all educators. If they find their passion, they will excel at teaching it, and you do that very, very well. I can listen to you talking about disability and access, and particularly access inclusion, until the cows come home, and that's why I really wanted to share this with our Ectopics audience. For nurses out there that want to know more about inclusion access and how they can learn more about disability, what's the best way to get in contact with you, or how do we find you? You're on Facebook?
Yeah, so we have an Inclusion Access Facebook page, and I do 3 or 4 updates a week with different. Some are just fun updates. Some are actually, this is what an accessible car parking space should look like. This is what a shared zone, that sort of stuff.
Yep. And I'll put a link to that on our ECT for Health Facebook page. I'll put another link on that. So look for that nice and fresh link.
Otherwise, to contact me, there is a contact area on the page where you can fill out some stuff, and I'll be in contact with you. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if you send an email to josh@inclusionaccess.com.au, that'll come straight to me.
Josh @inclusionaccess.com.au.
That'll come straight to me, and I'm always on the phone trying to sort through these things, and that's great. That's what I want to do. I mean, once again, it's a legacy. It's not so much about, all right, when can we and can't we do it? Let's fit you in the best we can. Let's get this knowledge out there. Mm-hmm. Let's change the face of disability.
Yeah.
I want to live in a society where everybody matters. Everybody belongs. Everybody has a role to play and is not actually, I suppose, discriminated against for what they can and can't do. Let's look at where the world's coming. So we're becoming a non-accessible world. All of a sudden we're becoming more accessible. And that's because of standards like the access to premises standards. Mm-hmm. There's accessibility. Now we're becoming a more inclusive world where we accept people into our venues. We don't have a chance. We don't have a choice. We have to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a step on top of that I'm trying to achieve, and that's equity.
Yep.
Let's look. Inclusion has been given a set of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Equity has been given a set of shoes that fit.
Oh, say that again. That's nice.
Inclusion has been given a set of shoes, so you can participate in the race.
Yeah.
Equity has been given a set of shoes that actually fit you.
Yeah.
And that's where we want
Inclusion's telling a fish that they're allowed to go up a tree, whereas access is being able to give the fish the tools to be able to climb the tree.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm trying to do. It's not a big feat. It's nothing to be overly, applauded for. It's just trying to make the world a more accessible place. Everybody deserves access. Everybody deserves to be included.
I think that's a great place to finish, Josh. That's an excellent chat. Thank you. We could go on for hours and hours and hours. I know that this is going to generate some discussion, and I'll certainly forward any comments or questions that come through to our podcast through to you. You've been listening to Josh Marshall from Inclusion Access, who is much bigger than the disability.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Josh. We'll see you next time, folks. This is Rob Timmings with an Ectopics episode, signing off for yet another episode.